I am sitting here with, I would consider you a newer friend, but definitely a brother in Christ, Keith Kasarjian. Keith, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brandon. It's good to be with you today. I appreciate the invitation to come on and chat with you for a few minutes.
Well, absolutely. I appreciate it. Well, really, I have to give you some credit here because you are pretty much the inspiration for how Treasure even began. And so
Okay.
go ahead and tell the audience who you are, what you do, and yeah, just what you do.
Okay. Well, my name is Keith Kasarjian. I am the Director of International Studies for the Bear Valley Bible Institute in Denver. So there are 46, soon to be more, preacher training schools around the world. And I'm lucky enough to get to be at the wheel with a lot of good folks on the team helping train preachers around the world. Prior to that, for 20 years, I preached full time for churches. And it was during that time that the idea for the seminars that I do came to be. Since then, I've been able to do it in many places in the US, but also in international settings as well, because these principles are, while there are some minor detail differences, the principles of managing money and all of the things related to it remain the same.
Awesome. So let me ask you this. So tell us exactly, like, how did these financial seminars start? I mean, so I know that your core work is directing these international studies, but how did the financial piece start? Were you sort of like one of our guest said that he was a financial hobbyist? I mean, so how did this all start? Tell us where it all began.
Well, I'll give a short answer and then I'll back up and expound a little bit probably. But so when I was preaching regularly, like most preachers do periodically, I would preach on giving. And it was in my experience with that, which was successful, but from what people were telling me, I was hearing there are a lot of people who don't give well, but would like to give well, but they've not managed well. And so they have nothing to give.
Right.
And so I thought, if we're going to really address this very important need of giving like we should, as we've been prospered, we're going to need to back it up and think about stewardship in the broader, more and the fuller context. We say stewardship and we automatically think giving, but there's so much more to stewardship than that. Amen. In fact, if you go to the parable of the talents, which is stewardship, and talent is money there, you see that how they managed what they had been entrusted was the core of what the master was judging them by.
Right.
And so, we've forgotten that, and that's been very overlooked in our church settings. We like to talk about giving. Actually, sometimes we don't even do that. We're afraid people might push back, but it's a very biblical topic. But so is how we manage anything that has been entrusted to us, and that goes even beyond our finances or even the material things, time, talent, and all that. But what I was discovering was there were a lot of people that just did not have any idea they wanted to. It wasn't for a lack of desire. They just didn't really have any idea how to manage the resources very well. And so it just became, there was a very real need. I started doing it, and then somebody else said, hey, can you come do it here? And, a bunch of years later, there's been a few places where I've been able to do that. And as I said, even in foreign settings as well.
That's awesome. So, and I appreciate what you said there. Your motivation isn't necessarily that we become, financial gurus, that we become, the next Warren Buffetts. That's not the premise. The premise is we want to give more to God. We want to be able to do more ministry for the kingdom's sake. So that's the motivation. That's the reason. And so I appreciate that. And that's so true. We love to, I've said this before. It seems like if we do as a church address the subject of money, we only address it from a giving standpoint. We don't address a situation in which we deal with every single day, and that the Bible talks about more than just money that's put in the collection plate. So it's an everyday occurrence, it's an everyday problem, everyday issue. And I really do believe that if we're not careful, it may lead to, even gate trouble, as one would say, when it comes to their relationship with Jesus, with God. So I really appreciate what you said there. Uh, so let me ask you this question, and it may be an obvious question for you and I, but it may not be so obvious for some of our listeners. Does the Bible actually address the subject, which this is what we're going to be talking about for the most part? Does the Bible actually address the subject of debt?
Debt, yeah, it does. In general, for example, like Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 7. And I've actually encouraged people in my seminars, like get a Sharpie and write Proverbs 22:7 on your credit card, because Proverbs 22:7 says that the borrower is servant to the lender. And you have to remember the context. This is in Proverbs. Who wrote that?
Well, Solomon,
A
a rich
pretty
man.
well-off guy.
Yeah, right.
He's also the same one who said that money just makes wings and flies away. Like even Solomon thought, wow, this is amazing. If you don't know where your money's going, it's just gone and you don't know where it's going. But he said, now I'm trusting that he was in the position of lender and not borrower.
Right.
And in that position of leverage, perhaps every month when the payments came in, he was reminded, wow, if you're borrowing, you really are the servant to the one you have borrowed from. And anybody who's actually in debt, they're feeling that same pressure every single month, and have gotten themselves in such a bind that the stress, the feeling of helplessness, of hopelessness, sometimes it is a true statement that the borrower is servant to the lender. And so when we begin to borrow money, which is not inherently bad, I assume we'll talk about some of that as we go along, but if you borrow money, you become a servant. And it does bring about bondage, legal, because you're now obligated to pay them. Emotionally, sometimes it brings about stress and fears, and and you have those. And then time, because many times people who have borrowed money will have to work longer, or at least a fair amount of the time they do work, that time is dedicated simply to the one they borrowed the money from. And so it is true that we become slaves to the one we borrow from, and slaves in more than one way. And so, yeah, certainly we have to understand the ramifications of debt. Somebody said debt's like a comfortable bed. It's really easy to get into, and it's really hard to get out of. And we live in a culture that has made it very, very easy to get into debt.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our financial institutions, our major financial institutions, are driven by consumer debt. So it is definitely a makeup, a DNA of our country now, and it's growing. And I mean, we're in the trillions now when it comes to U.S. debt. And there may be people listening, maybe possibly in other foreign countries, and maybe they have similar debt loads, maybe not in the trillions, but I mean, I'm assuming it's a world issue. I mean, it's an issue that has happened even as early as God's people in Israel. So awesome. So I guess that does lead us into this next question, which is there such thing as good debt and bad debt? I've always said this, there's two schools of people that are pushing this debate, and that of course is Dave Ramsey and Robert Kiyosaki. Two people that have pretty much way different views when it comes to the idea of debt. And they really have drawn the question where a lot of people are scratching their heads and wondering, is debt even a good thing? Is it a blessing or is it a curse? Is it good or is it bad? So tell us a little bit about that and maybe your own experience when it comes to, figuring that question out.
Yeah, and I would say the easy thing is to give like a patent standard answer. Debt is bad, all debt is bad, or debt is good, whatever. I know I don't listen to him, but I have. Dave Ramsey thinks all debt is bad. I think I understand that he believes all debt is bad.
Right.
Kiyosaki, who wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad, I've read, and I listen to him occasionally. Um, I wish it was just as easy as saying yes, no. But the deal for me, and this is how I kind of define it, is good debt is when we borrow money at a good rate for something that appreciates. And bad debt is when we borrow money for something that depreciates.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's situation is going to be perhaps a little bit different. Now, I say appreciates. Housing generally appreciates. It doesn't always. Like there really is no safe bet. What was it? Mid 2000s, the housing market tanked. Right now, the housing market is booming. It is a seller's market. It's insane what is happening in the market. So theoretically, all of our housing prices are going up. Now, it doesn't do you any good if you don't sell.
Right.
But if you do sell, now you have to buy something in this same market. So theoretically, housing prices appreciate. So if you borrow money for something that appreciates, that's probably pretty good. If you borrow money for something that depreciates, that's probably not working in your favor. Right. For example, a car, especially if you don't buy it right. If you buy a new car, for example, estimates are literally the minute you drive it off the lot, it depreciates by 15%. Mm-hmm. And then when you figure the annual depreciation, most people are what is called upside down in their car loan for the first 2 to 3 years of a 4-year car loan, which means what that means is they still owe more on the car than the car is worth. Right. So if they suddenly needed to sell the car, they could not even sell it for what they still owe on it. That's called upside down. That's a really bad place to be. Mm-hmm. And so for me, there's no one size fits all answer. There's just general principles. If you're borrowing at a good rate for something that appreciates, then that's probably okay. Or if you feel like you have some way of feeling like you know what you're doing, for example, I'll give a personal illustration. I recently got a car loan for the first time in, I don't know how long, 20 years or more, because the rates are so low. The vehicle I have could have paid cash. The vehicle that money is in is currently earning twice as much as the interest rate that I got the car loan for. Wow. So I'm letting it continue to work for me, and then from those proceeds pay them. And so I don't know if this sounds confusing to the average person, but let's just say what the money you have is earning 10%. The money you borrow is costing you 5%. Your net gain there is still 5%. And if somebody feels like that's kind of out of their league, that's fine. Don't attempt it. But I guess that further illustrates how there really is no one size fits all. Right. And so it can be good, it can be terrible. And I would say this: if you choose to enter into debt, know what you're doing, and you be in control of that. Yes. And if you can avoid being in debt, that's even better. Now, so for example, Dave Ramsey says, no debt, pay off your house, like double your payments, triple your payments, pay off your house, get down to nothing as soon as you can, which generally I would agree with. Back, my first mortgage I ever had was 9%. Tells you how old I am. Wow. Well, at 9%, yeah. I mean, do what you can to try to pay that bad boy off. Yeah. My current mortgage is 3%. I got to tell you, I'm in no hurry. I am in zero hurry to get
Right,
that paid off.
right.
And you see there's a 6% difference, and that's huge. And so
Mhm.
again, there is no one size fits all answer. I would just say that if you choose to go into debt, you be in control of that,
Right.
and don't go into it because you didn't plan properly, or you're just making unwise choices or something
Mhm.
to that effect.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with you. It depends on you. It depends on your situation, what you can afford to do. But I think what makes it bad all the time is when people make decisions when they know they can't afford that decision.
Yeah.
And so you end up getting into situations that you weren't, wanting to get into. For example, usually what happens when people get into debt is that things start to priorities start to change, right? And usually, what's one of the first priorities that is very easy for most people to walk away from? Their responsibilities to the church, their responsibilities to God. Giving
Right.
goes away. Um, if you don't attend church because you got several jobs that you have to keep up with, of course, naturally giving is going to usually diminish, right? So it's going to be very easy in that situation to walk away from that responsibility that you have as a child of God. So that would have never happened if you had made a wiser management decision with your money, with your debt. So yeah, so it can definitely become a ripple effect. So I guess that sort of leads me into my next question, and maybe you want to elaborate more on this, but um, is it possible? Can the misuse of debt become what we would call a salvation issue? Could this be an issue? Because I've heard Dave Ramsey, and I know we're mentioning Dave Ramsey a lot because most church people know who Dave Ramsey is. He would say, the issue of debt isn't necessarily a salvation issue. Like you're not going to go to hell for using debt, right? And that's as far as his conversations go, as far as the responsibility of the Christian when it comes to that. But is it possible that the misuse of debt can become a salvation issue?
Yeah, I think so. I think so because it can directly relate to our honesty and our integrity.
Mm.
And Solomon talks about the fool is the one who borrows money and doesn't pay it back.
Hmm.
And why was that included in Scripture? I mean, I think there's a principle there. And this is anything. If I go to my neighbor and I say, "Can I borrow your shovel?" and he lets me, and I don't give it back, or I break it and I say,
Mm.
"Oops, sorry," and I don't make
Right.
restitution, at
Hmm.
the very and somebody's like, it's a $20 shovel. No, it's a basic level of integrity and honesty.
Right.
I borrowed it, and everybody had the expectation I would give it back in as good a shape, if not better.
Right.
And if I don't do that, it's not about a shovel. It's about my honesty and my integrity.
Right.
And so, yeah, the credit card makes it really easy for you to just run up all kinds of stuff on it. And but if there is no plan, if someone's like, "Oh, I'll pay it back," no, no. If there is no plan, if there's no resources, there's no reasonable expectation that you are going to do that. It's not about a bill. It's not about debt. It's about integrity and honesty.
Right.
And so that's where it shifts from strictly financial into spiritual as well. By the way, financial and spiritual intersect far more, I think, than the average person realizes.
Yeah.
If God entrusts something to us, how we manage it becomes a spiritual matter.
Right.
Period. I think that's a biblical principle. If whatever it is, if God entrusts it to us, then how we manage that becomes a spiritual matter.
Right.
And so even the managing of money and all of that is spiritual, but as it relates to debt, it can become not a matter of debt per se, but honesty and integrity.
Right. Amen. You're absolutely right. I mean, that's essentially the parable of the 10 talents, or the talent men. Yeah, because the one talent man decided to bury that talent instead of using it the way the master wanted it to be used. That master not only took the coin or the talent away from him, but even kicked him out of the master's home. And so I was talking about this in my Bible class just last night. I mean, imagine God has basically, fully entrusts us with all these possessions, all this material. He's not hovering over us, just like that master who decided to entrust his servants and went on a journey, right? But so when God comes back, right? When Jesus comes back, what investment are we going to be giving him, right? Because if we don't do good on this earthly house, how in the world is he going to want to put us in the heavenly home, right? When this life is over? No, he's going to kick us out, just like that master kicked that one talent man out of his home. And he lost all his privileges and everything, So yeah, it can be a salvation issue, and is definitely something that we definitely need to address. So, right. So, I think we already talked. We talked a little bit about this, but I want to elaborate a little bit more on this question. What are some of the main issues of using and being in debt? What are some of the main issues?
Well, from my experience, either because when I do these seminars, sometimes I'll take some private questions, between sessions. I also do financial counseling, just locally for free, just to help people. And the thing that I've learned from all of that, it's kind of, there's this one common denominator, and there's no plan. There's no plan. So people will say, what do I need to do to get in order? What do I need to do to get rid of my, okay, tell me about, what is your budget? What is your spending plan? Oh, we don't have one. That is the number one. It's not 100%, but that's the top common denominator that everybody I've ever come in contact with who has financial problems is they don't even have a plan. Now, you can have a plan and not stick with it, and you'll still have problems.
Right.
But if you don't have a plan, it's never going to go well. And so without a plan, now we're just kind of just drifting, and we will inherently, it's just a natural human nature. We will just spend more than we should have, and on some things that we didn't even need. We're not planned. We're not, necessary, any of that. And then suddenly we're in a situation where our outgo exceeds our income.
Mm-hmm.
And the old saying is, if your outgo exceeds your income, your upkeep will be your downfall.
Yeah.
And so suddenly now what I'm making doesn't even cover what I have to have.
Mm-hmm.
So now what do I do? Well, okay, I'll charge it, and yeah, I'll take care of that. But that's not a plan. That's a wish. And so if people don't have a budget, you can call it a budget. I call it a spending plan.
Yeah.
Budget sounds like diet. Versus I'm going to plan what I eat. I'm going to eat, right? So if I want to eat healthier, I'm just going to plan ahead of time how I'm going to eat and what I'm going to eat. Right. Same with our finances. We're going to spend money. That's the primary purpose of it. The difference is, will I tell it where to go, or will I wonder where it went?
Right.
And unfortunately, most people are in the latter category. It's going. It's just a matter of whether you decide where it's going or not. So you have to have a plan, and then you have to stick to the plan. Right. And if you don't, you're just going to constantly be behind the eight ball, just constantly. And that's no way to live. Like, nobody who's in that situation right now says, you know what, I've never felt better about life. It's just great, No, they're every month, every week, they feel the pressure of like, what are we going to do? Yeah. Some feel embarrassment because they're having to reach out to family or churches or whatever for help. And it's just not where they want to be. And they don't have to be in that situation, but it begins with choosing ahead of time a spending plan.
Right. I love how you said that, and that's honestly my motto when I deal with my clients, when I talk about finances, do seminars. That is the vision spending plan. Like, get budget out of your mouth. That diet, we don't want that. We want a lifestyle change. And that's really how, even when it comes to working out and eating right, it's a lifestyle decision, not just we're going to do this for a month. And then, like most New Year's resolutions, by February, we're done with it, right? We don't want to continue it. But yeah, if we're planning this out because we know we're going to spend money, well, how are we going to do it? And I'm sure you already know this, that if we go after the bank's plan of how to pay off credit cards and debt, we'll be in debt till the day we die if we try to do it the bank's way,
That's
So
fact.
yeah, that's fact. That's fact. So yeah, it can be a dangerous game when people mess with credit, especially credit cards. When people mess with that, they don't realize that those minimum payments are very minimal.
Yeah.
And they only pay the interest, they don't pay the principal hardly at all. So that's why it keeps you in this cycle. And as well as I know, if you don't pay it off by the end of the month, the entire balance, we're not talking about just that purchase you made. No, we're talking the entire credit card balance. If you don't pay that off by the end of the month, then they're going to attack that interest every single time. So,
And they're happy to do it. They're happy
yes.
to let you
Yeah.
stretch this out as long as you can.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah,
That's how they're in
absolutely.
business.
Right. Then they'll keep you in the slavery mentality, in a servitude position. And they love that. So absolutely. So Solomon knew what he was talking about when he mentioned the slave is debt to a lender. So awesome. Um, so since you are a world traveler, since
Mm-hmm.
you are a world traveler, what are some of the similarities and even the differences between how we in the US use debt and how other countries use debt, both good and bad? What similarities and maybe some differences that you see since you've been doing these seminars all across the world?
Yeah, I would say the immediate difference. I've probably been in about 60 countries, every continent but Antarctica. Um, and I only say that to give like a context perspective. Some of these countries are first world, some of these are very third world. I've been in, if you were to list or look up the 20 poorest countries in the world, I've probably been in most of them, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So broad range of context. In many parts of the world, one of the big differences between how we live and they live is our easy access to credit.
Mm.
That is a primary difference, because I remember, like, when I was in college, I was getting ready to graduate, and I thought I probably ought to start trying to maybe get a credit card. I had to apply for it, and I remember kind of being nervous, like, will they even let me have this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fast forward to now.
Right.
I mean, you might get 10 a week in the mail, pre-approved,
Yep.
yada, yada, yada.
Yep.
And literally you don't have to you don't have to prove anything, much of anything.
Right.
Sign your name. They're happy to use it. What,
Mm-hmm.
credit card companies make their money as soon as you use it. So even if you pay it off, I mean, they're still making money. They make 3% on most. American Express is 5% transaction fee with the seller. So they're making their money. Like, they're happy for you to have this, because
Yep.
even if you never pay them interest, even if you never pay a late fee, they're still making money off you. So
Yep.
they're happy to let you have it. The problem is it's dangerous.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who don't have not yet developed the self-control to only use it when they know they can just pay it off. Also, it's dangerous in that studies have proven that even for those who never carry a balance,
Mm-hmm.
they tend to spend more with a credit card than they do with cash.
Right.
Studies have shown 22% increase. That for the person who uses a credit card, they typically spend 22% more than they would have if they'd used cash. And I think the obvious explanation is there's no immediate pain associated with using that credit card.
Right.
It's so easy. You insert and you swipe. Now you can just tap. You can do it on your
Yeah.
mobile. It's the easiest thing ever, and there's no immediate pain. Whereas if you pull a 20 out of your pocket, you're very aware you just became $20 poorer.
Yep.
and you feel that even on a subconscious level. So I would warn, even so, I've had people tell me, well, I never carry a balance. Well, that's good, but still be careful, because you can end up spending more than you would have otherwise. And in a lot of places in the world, that's just not possible, to just get a credit card, to just, and so there is a big challenge for us that they don't have to deal with. Our culture makes it really, really easy to go into debt. And so that's a big challenge.
Right.
And now some similarities are, everybody wants something they cannot afford.
Right.
They do. And it really doesn't matter what it is, fill in the blank. We can all be challenged by a dissatisfaction. I want more, I want newer, I want bigger. And that is not a first world thing. That's a human thing.
Yeah.
And I see it on different levels. The guy that used to walk everywhere, he's thinking, if I only had a bicycle, man, then my life would be good. And then he gets a bicycle, and now he's got a bicycle. But you know how it is, it's not long before he's kind of wishing he had a motorcycle, because if I had just had a motorcycle, I didn't have to pedal this thing, So now he wants to get a motorcycle, and then it never ends. What we are dissatisfied about changes culture to culture, but the human nature, the human tendency to always want something else exists no matter where you are.
Right.
And it is that is a driver of debt. So the guy says, if I just had a bicycle, so he's got a cousin who will loan him $100 to get a bicycle. But now guess what? He's in debt.
Yep.
And, by the way, how many family problems have been caused because one family member loaned another family member money, and then it kind of went south on that, which is, very, very dangerous thing too, because our relationships are valuable as well. And so a singular difference is how easy it is to get into debt. A singular similarity is that there is in all of us these inherent desires that we have that could lead us into debt, and that could be the driver of bad decisions, of impulse purchases, and all that. So we have to be aware of that. And again, that's where the plan comes in.
Right.
So if you make this plan, the decisions are made. It's made. Like, I don't have to make a decision every time the decision was made once and for all. If it's not in the plan, it doesn't happen. Or if it's in the plan, but this is the number, that's it. And nothing more happens. And so the plan is actually liberating. I tell people when I counsel them, like, if you have been living without a plan, you have no idea for how good it's going to feel to get a plan. It is liberating, because instead of just always feeling like I just have to do less, now we've already planned out what we're going to do, and then we just stick with it. And so we don't have a plan, we don't stick to the plan, it can lead us into debt pretty quickly.
Right. Wow, that's incredible. So it's a human problem that exists
Very much
everywhere. So Solomon wasn't just talking to the people in the United States, he was talking to everybody in the world, including Israel. So everybody has an issue. And I love that you said in most first world countries, including the United States, it's very easy for us because that is our economy. We're a consumer economy. So of course they're going to want you to spend, hence why they gave us a stimulus. It wasn't necessarily just to, take care of your living expenses for that period of time. It was designed for you to spend it, so
our own government is currently trying to activate inflation.
Right.
Now, get your brain around that. We tend to think of inflation as negative, but our Federal Reserve is actively trying to stimulate inflation.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So perspective. So absolutely. So last question. And I'm sure because you're an educator, you probably have a ton of books, but what are some books that you would recommend on the subject of debt and personal finance?
Okay. Well, I actually, on that shelf there, I have a few books. One of them is the first. How I kind of got really interested in this was I was just amazed at how some small little changes can make a, done consistently over time can make big changes. And one of the books that I first read, I think it was called How to Be a Smart Money Manager, and the author is Pope. Now, is it still out there? I don't know, because I first read it like 25 plus years ago.
Okay.
But I'll just give a real quick illustration of one thing I remember from that book: how small changes can add up. We were in a situation where we had two cars, and it was always so one's newer and we got a loan on it, one's older that's already been paid off. But guess what? By the time you get that newer one paid off, the older one's ready to be replaced. And I was like, it kind of hit me. I'm going to be constantly, perpetually, for the rest of my life making a car payment.
All right.
In that book, I read, if you can just gut it out for 4 years, buy a beater with cash, whatever, you sell something, whatever, drive that beater while you're making car payments to yourself. Then in 4 years, in theory, you can pay for the next car with cash. And not only are you not paying interest, you're actually earning interest on what you're saving. And so I thought, wow, that's a game changer. And I did it. Those first 4 years were not enjoyable because of what I was driving. And it was an old vehicle. It didn't have air conditioning, no power steering. One time I actually pulled a muscle in my chest trying to park it. But that was a quarter century ago, and I have not had to take out a car loan since. So I made one adjustment. Wasn't easy up front, but the benefits have paid off. And I learned that in that book. And so I would, I don't know that I have any favorites. That one comes to mind. But I would encourage anybody to begin just seeking practical wisdom. There's more of it available now than ever before.
Oh, yeah.
Just begin seeking practical wisdom, because even just small changes done consistently over time can make a big difference. And so, that's a book that comes to my mind. But there's a lot out there. And again, I would encourage anybody. So I've got Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Kiyosaki up there. I've got Ramsey up there. And they're not going to always say the same thing about the same things.
Right.
But that's where we use our own wisdom and discretion to decide what our own situation's calling for. And then, and do what's best. But the average person's problem is not they had too much information. Right. I mean, you think about in school, we don't teach this stuff in school hardly. I think we had one quarter on personal finance. We teach people about the Pythagorean theorem, like that's going to actually help them, but we don't have much knowledge. So I would encourage people to seek wisdom in different places, but the problem is almost never a lack of knowledge. The problem is almost never too much knowledge. It's a lack of knowledge.
Yeah.
And so begin to think. But as part of another thing, we kind of put our lives on cruise control. We don't even think about it. I just recently reevaluated our car and home insurance and could not believe the difference. So I changed providers, and it's going to be an instant, I don't know, $100 a month savings, something like that. That's $1,200 a year. I'd rather have it than them.
Right.
But again, don't put everything on cruise control. Subscriptions are a killer, and I know this is primarily about debt, but all of that relates to our being able to pay for our lifestyle as we go.
Right.
And which is living within our means. If we can't live within our means, we end up in debt.
Right. Yeah.
And here we go. Then the problems compound.
Right. Yeah. I appreciate that you mentioned, this is something, it's so interesting that we have to know all these different things in grade school, but one of the subjects that aren't being taught hardly at all is personal finance. So, and it's not from a lack of knowledge, that we have available. It's the fact that it's not being put in places that it needs to be placed in, such as a kid that's gonna eventually go into this world and have no concept whatsoever about any type of personal financial literacy or debt for that matter. And I almost think it's designed that way for you to not know. So you make these mistakes so other people may get richer from your mistakes.
Yeah.
So it's a shame that that's the reality. And I've talked to some kids who have gone through personal financial classes before. They may have had a math teacher that cared more about them, and they designed it in their curriculum to teach some of that. But because of how young they were, sort of went in one ear and out the other, so to speak. So unless in college, unless you seek it out, for most people, it's not something that they're going to learn.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of, most people have to, if they ever learn, they just kind of learn it on the job
Right.
training.
Yeah. And the school of
And I
hard
wish I had
knocks.
known it sooner,
Yeah.
but I didn't. And so, but what I have learned has helped me, and I've then tried to use the years since to try to help others as well.
Right. Yeah.
And it's possible for anybody who's listening, you're in debt. You may feel hopeless. Like it may just seem insurmountable. It isn't.
No.
I promise it is not. In fact, one of the sessions that I do in the seminar, the entire session is digging out of debt. How can you dig out of debt? Well, we don't have time to talk about all that today, but my point is it is possible. Get a game plan, stick with it. It's worth it. You don't want to live in debt. You don't want to live under that pressure. It may seem hopeless, it may seem helpless, but it is not. I promise it is not.
Right. I think for most people, it's the fact that they know if they're going to pay off a huge amount of debt, that there's going to have to be a huge lifestyle change that's coming. And I don't know if people are willing to make that kind of sacrifice. And that's the thing. So yeah, like you said, it's not impossible, but there's going to be a lot of changes that have to happen in order to make it happen,
Yeah, if you keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting.
That's right.
And if you don't like getting what you've been getting, you're going to have to stop doing what you've been doing.
Right. That's the definition of insanity.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. So, well, Keith, thank you so much, man, for being on the show with us and dropping that knowledge. And we appreciate it. And I'm probably going to have you again on the show, since you've been doing this for some time. And again, like I said, you're the inspiration for Treasure Workshop. We appreciate everything that you do in the ministry that you're involved in, and Bear Valley. We appreciate their work. And so just keep doing it, man. We appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir.
All right. You take care.
You too. Hey, thank you so much for watching our videos and podcasts. If you want more videos and more podcasts, you can like us on Facebook and Instagram and subscribe to us on YouTube. We'll see you next time.